I parked the truck where the access road quit, right up against a chain-link fence with a padlock the size of my fist. The Gunflint Trail stretched behind us, empty both ways. Nobody came out here in January unless they had to. I had to. The work order said the transmitter at Site November Whiskey Romeo 7 had dropped offline twice in the past week. Standard winter stuff, probably. Ice on the lines or a breaker that needed babysitting. I'd done this kind of call maybe 50 times. Drive out, check the basics, log it, drive back. 4 hours round trip if the roads were clear. I killed the engine and sat there for a second. My head felt like someone had stuffed it with steel wool. I'd gotten maybe 4 hours of sleep, and 2 of those were on the couch because I'd passed out there around 2 in the morning with a can of Busch Light still in my hand. That was 3 nights in a row. 4 if you counted the weekend. I needed to quit doing that. The wind hit me the second I opened the door. It came across the frozen lake to the east and didn't stop for anything. I pulled my knit cap down over my ears and zipped the high-vis jacket all the way up. The cold got in anyway. It always did. Rowan was already out of the passenger side, standing by the fence and looking at the trail that led up to the hut. He didn't seem in any kind of hurry. He had his parka hood up and his gloves on, and he was just standing there like we were on a nature hike. "Keys in the usual spot?" he asked. "Lockbox on the fence post," I said. "Codes in the binder." I grabbed the binder from behind my seat and flipped to the site index. November, Whiskey Romeo 7. Code was 7729. I punched it into the lockbox and pulled out the gate key and the hut key, both on a carabiner with a faded plastic tag. The gate opened fine. No ice on the hinges. That was something. The trail to the hut was maybe 200 yards through the trees, and the snow had drifted across it in uneven waves. Nobody had been up here in a while. I could see the hut at the far end, a squat cinder block box with a steel roof and a small antenna mast rising from the back corner. It looked exactly like every other NOAA repeater hut I'd ever serviced. Plain, functional, cold. I started walking. The snow came up past my ankles in some spots, and the wind kept pushing at my back. My boots crunched through the crust. I kept my eyes on the hut and didn't think about much. That was easier than thinking about the headache or the fact that I'd have to do this all over again tomorrow at a different site. Rowan was a few steps behind me, taking his time. "You good?" I called back. "Yeah, man. Just enjoying the scenery." There wasn't any scenery, just snow and trees and gray sky. But that was Rowan. He could make a trip to a transmitter hut sound like a weekend getaway. I didn't have the energy for it. I checked my watch. 9:43. We were supposed to be back in Duluth by 3, and Paisley had sent me 2 texts already asking for updates. She did that on every call. Wanted to know when we arrived, when we started work, when we finished, when we left. I got it. She had a whole grid of contractors to manage and a dozen sites that could go down at any time. But it made every job feel like I was on a countdown. I pulled out my phone and sent her a quick message. "Arrived on site, starting inspection." She replied in under a minute. "Copy. Report findings by 1100. That gave me an hour and 17 minutes. Fine. The hut door was metal, painted white about a decade ago, and the paint was peeling in long strips. I unlocked it and pushed. It stuck for a second, then scraped open across the concrete floor. Inside was warmer. Not warm, but warmer. Maybe 40 degrees instead of 15. There was a small electric heater in the corner that kicked on automatically when the temperature dropped too far. It kept the equipment from freezing, but it didn't do much for comfort. The hut was one room, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. Racks of equipment lined the left wall: transmitter, backup transmitter, power supply, battery bank, a mess of cables running between them. A small desk sat against the right wall with a logbook, a clipboard, and a dusty office phone that probably didn't work anymore. The floor was bare concrete. The only window was a narrow slot near the ceiling, too high to see out of. I dropped my pack by the door and pulled out the inspection checklist. Rowan came in behind me, moving slow, and set his gear down next to mine. "Smells like old electronics," he said. Yeah, it did. That stale, dry smell of circuit boards and dust. I was used to it. I clicked on my flashlight and started at the top of the rack. Visual inspection first. Check for burned components, loose cables, anything obviously wrong. The primary transmitter looked fine. All the indicator lights were green. The backup was in standby mode, also fine. I ran my hand along the power cables and checked the connections. Tight. No corrosion. Rowan was poking around the desk, flipping through the logbook. "Last entries from November," he said. "Nobody comes out here unless something breaks. Guess something broke." Guess so. I moved down to the battery bank. 12 deep cycle batteries wired in series, sitting on a wooden pallet to keep them off the cold floor. I checked the voltage on the first one. 12.4. Good. I checked the second. 12.3. Also good. The quiet was starting to get to me a little. Not the lack of noise. There was the hum of the equipment and the faint rattle of the heater, but the sense of being way the hell out in the middle of nowhere with nobody around. I didn't mind it most of the time. I actually preferred working alone. But today it felt heavier than usual. Probably the hangover. I kept working. Rowan was leaning against the desk now, watching me. "You seem tired," he said. "I'm fine." "You sure? You've been kind of off all week." "I'm fine," I said again. He didn't push it. That was one thing I liked about Rowan. He knew when to leave something alone. I checked my watch again. 10:12. I needed to move faster. I logged the battery voltages in the binder and moved on to the transmitter settings. Everything looked normal. Frequency was locked in. Power output was steady at 50 watts. No error codes in the diagnostic menu. So what the hell was the problem? I pulled out my phone and checked the work order again. Intermittent signal loss. Duration approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Occurred January 4th at 0900 and January 7th at 1400. Today was January 9th. I frowned. Intermittent problems were the worst. If something was completely dead, you could trace it. If it was intermittent, you had to wait for it to happen again, or try to recreate the conditions that caused it. And out here in the middle of winter, the conditions were pretty much always the same. Cold, windy, remote. I went back to the power supply and checked the logs. There were 2 entries flagged in red. January 4th and January 7th. Both showed a brief dropout in input voltage, just a couple seconds, but enough to kick the transmitter offline. When the power came back, the transmitter rebooted and everything resumed, so it was a power issue. Probably a bad connection somewhere in the line from the main panel to the hut. That meant I'd have to trace the whole run, and that meant going back outside. Great. I made a note in the binder and checked my watch. 10:31. I pulled out my phone and texted Paisley. "Primary inspection complete. Possible power supply issue. Tracing external lines now." She replied fast. "Understood. Stay on schedule." "Right." I told Rowan we needed to check the line outside, and he nodded and grabbed his pack. We stepped back out into the cold, and I locked the door behind us. The main power line ran from a utility pole about 100 yards south of the hut, buried for most of the run but exposed where it entered the building through a conduit on the back wall. I walked around to the back and checked the conduit. No obvious damage. No ice buildup. I pulled the cover off the junction box and checked the connections inside. Everything looked tight. I kept moving down the line, following the shallow trench where the cable was buried. Every 10 feet or so, I stopped and checked for signs of damage, places where the ground had shifted or where animals might have dug. Nothing. Rowan was walking parallel to me a few feet to the left, not saying much. The wind picked up and I pulled my hood tighter. By the time I got to the utility pole, I'd checked the whole run and found nothing. That bugged me a little. If it wasn't a bad connection, it had to be something upstream. And if it was upstream, it wasn't my problem. It was the utility company's problem. But Paisley would want me to confirm that before I closed the ticket. I headed back to the hut. Inside, I checked the clock on the wall. 11:07. I was already past Paisley's deadline. I sent her another text. External line clear. Issue likely upstream. Monitoring transmitter for anomalies. She didn't reply right away. That was unusual. I sat down at the desk and opened the logbook. Rowan was leaning against the rack, drinking water from a bottle he'd pulled out of his pack. He looked relaxed. I didn't feel relaxed. I flipped back through the log entries, looking for patterns. Most of the pages were blank. A few had notes from other contractors. Replaced fuse A3. Cleaned air filter. Rebooted transmitter after lightning strike. Normal stuff. Then I noticed something. The two dropout events, January 4th and January 7th, had both happened at different times of day, 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. If it was a utility problem, you'd expect it to happen during peak load times like early evening when everyone was running heaters and cooking dinner. But 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon? That didn't fit. I stared at the log for a second, trying to figure it out. Then the transmitter clicked. It was a loud, sharp sound, like a relay engaging. I looked up. The green indicator light on the primary transmitter went dark. Then it came back on. Then it went dark again. Rowan straightened up. What's it doing? I don't know. The light cycled 3 more times. On, off, on, then stayed on. The whole sequence took maybe 10 seconds. I stood up and walked over to the rack. The diagnostic menu was still open on the little LCD screen. I scrolled through the error log. A new entry had just appeared. Power interruption detected. Duration 4 seconds. But I'd just checked the power supply. It was fine. I checked it again. Voltage was steady, no fluctuations, no dropouts. The transmitter clicked again. This time the light stayed off for a full 5 seconds before it came back on. Rowan was watching me. That normal? No. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 11:14. The transmitter clicked a third time. Off, on, off, on. It was cycling, just like someone was flipping a switch, but there was no switch. The power supply was automatic. The transmitter was supposed to run continuously unless there was a fault or a manual shutdown, and I hadn't touched anything. I stood there staring at the rack and felt something shift in my chest. Not panic. Just a quiet realization that this wasn't routine anymore. This was something else. I turned back to the battery bank. The transmitter was still cycling. On, off, on again. But the power supply showed steady. That didn't track. I pulled the flashlight from my pocket and crouched next to the wooden pallet. 12 deep cycle batteries. Each one the size of a car battery. Sealed lead acid. Wired in parallel. I'd checked them half an hour ago. Voltages had been fine. 12.4 on the first. 12.3 on the second. Normal range for a standby system on trickle charge. I put the multimeter leads on the first battery again. 11.8. I blinked, checked the connection, tried again. 11.7. That was wrong. You don't lose half a volt in 30 minutes unless something's pulling hard. I moved to the second battery. 11.6. Third battery, 11.9. The whole bank was sagging. I stood and checked the panel mounted above the power supply. Green light next to utility input. Voltage readout showed 120 volts AC, steady. The battery bank was supposed to float on trickle charge when utility power was good. It wasn't supposed to discharge at all. Rowan. He looked up from the desk. He'd been flipping through the logbook again, probably looking for something that made sense. Battery's draining, I said. He frowned, came over and looked at the multimeter in my hand. How fast? Fast. I crouched again and tested the fourth battery. 11.7. Lost about half a volt in 30 minutes. All of them. But we're on grid power. Yeah. So why's it draining? I don't know. Rowan scratched the side of his face. Maybe the charger's offline. I pointed at the panel. Says it's feeding. Then something's drawing. Nothing should be. I stood and ran my eyes over the equipment rack. Transmitter, backup, power supply, cooling fan. The fan wasn't even running. It was only 40 degrees in here. Total draw should have been under 100 watts. The battery bank could handle that for days without sagging. I checked the multimeter again. First battery, 11.6 now. Rowan saw my face. That's not good. No. The transmitter clicked again. The light went dark for 3 seconds, came back on. I watched the panel. Utility input still green, voltage still 120. Go check the meter, I said. Outside? Yeah. Meter box is on the south side of the hut. See if it's spinning. Rowan pulled his gloves back on. You think the load's coming from somewhere else? I don't know what I think. I walked over to the desk and picked up the satellite phone from where I'd left it next to the logbook. I'm calling Paisley. She's gonna love that. Probably not. Rowan zipped his parka and headed for the door. Cold air rushed in when he opened it, then the latch clicked behind him and I was alone. I turned on the sat phone. It took a minute to acquire signal. The little bars climbed one at a time in the corner of the screen. When it finally connected, I pulled up Paisley's direct line and hit dial. It rang 4 times. I figured she wasn't going to pick up. She was probably in a meeting or dealing with another site. But then the line clicked. O'Brien. Paisley. It's Rice. November. Whiskey Romeo 7. Go ahead. Her voice had that clipped edge it always did when she was multitasking. I could hear someone talking in the background on her end. Office noise. We've got an unstable feed, I said. Transmitters cycling on and off. Power supply says utility input is good, but the battery bank's draining fast. Something's pulling load and I can't trace it. Silence for a second. Then, define fast. 0.5 volt in 30 minutes across the whole bank. That's not normal. No. More silence. I heard her typing. Any error codes? Just power interruption. 4-second dropout. But the panel shows steady voltage. You've checked the external line? Yeah, before this started. Line's clean all the way to the pole. Another pause. Longer this time. The typing stopped. Rice, I need you to hold. What's going on? Just hold. The line went quiet. Not dead. I could still hear the faint hiss of the connection, but she'd muted her end. I stood there with the phone against my ear and looked at the equipment rack. The transmitter light was steady now. Green, normal. But the power supply fan had kicked on, which meant it was working harder than it should have been. I checked my watch. 11:17. Paisley came back on. Rice, you still there? Yeah. Cook County Dispatch is receiving calls. What kind of calls? About the warning tone. Multiple reports in the last 20 minutes. Tones repeating on the broadcast frequency with no message afterward. I felt something tighten in my chest. We didn't key anything. I know. That's why I'm trying to confirm whether it's a local fault or something upstream. The transmitter's been cycling, I said. Maybe it's triggering the tone during reboot. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. How long until you can stabilize it? I don't know. I sent Rowan to check the meter. If the load's external, I need to trace it, and that could take... I need it stable, Rice. We've got people calling in thinking there's an emergency broadcast. I'm working on it. Work faster. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the desk. My headache was back, a dull throb behind my right eye. I should have eaten something this morning. Should have slept more than 4 hours. That was on me. I turned back toward the rack. The speaker mounted on the wall above the desk made a sound. It started low. A hum, maybe. Then it climbed into a high, sharp tone that filled the whole room. 3 seconds. steady pitch. Then it cut off. I froze. That was the warning tone. The emergency alert system tone. The one that plays before a weather alert or an amber alert or anything else that goes out on the broadcast band. But we hadn't keyed it. I walked over to the rack and checked the transmitter panel. No active input. No audio signal running through the chain. The VU meter was flat, dead silent. The tone sounded again. Same pitch, same length. 3 seconds, then nothing. I looked at the speaker. It was just a basic unit, maybe 6 inches across, mounted to the cinderblock wall with 2 screws. Connected to the monitoring system so we could hear what the transmitter was broadcasting. If the transmitter sent it, the speaker played it. That was the whole setup. But the transmitter wasn't sending anything. I checked the diagnostic screen. No input detected. No audio source active. The tone sounded a 3rd time. This time I felt it. Not just heard it. Felt it. In my teeth. In the bones of my jaw. It didn't sound like it was coming from the speaker anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the air. From the walls. From everywhere and nowhere. I took a step back. The door opened and Rowan came in, snow on his shoulders and his hood still up. He looked at me, then at the speaker. "You hear that?" I said. "Yeah, I heard it outside too." "Outside?" "Just faint. Thought it was coming from in here." He pulled his hood down and brushed snow off his sleeves. "Meter's spinning." "How fast?" "Fast. Like we're running a space heater and a kiln at the same time." He walked over to the rack and looked at the equipment. "But none of this should be pulling that kind of load." "I know." He started to say something else, but stopped. He was looking past me at the wall. I turned. The LED clock above the desk had jumped. It said 11:31. I checked my watch. 11:18. The clock snapped back. 11:18. Then forward again. 11:24. Then back. 11:18. It settled there, blinking once, then steady. Rowan didn't say anything. Neither did I. I just stood there, watching the clock, feeling the day slip out from under me. Feeling the rules I knew, voltage and current and load and time, bend into something I didn't have words for. The warning tone sounded again, and I realized we weren't fixing a transmitter anymore. I grabbed the logbook from the desk, figured I should write down what we'd just seen, the clock jumping around, the time on my watch not matching. Document everything. That's what you're supposed to do. I flipped it open to the next blank line. The last entry was mine from about 20 minutes ago, when I'd logged the battery voltages. I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket and started writing the time. Then I stopped. There was another entry below mine, my handwriting. I recognized it immediately. Same slant, same way I made the capital R in Rice. Same abbreviation I always used for transmitter. But I hadn't written it. The date was January 10th, tomorrow. I read it twice. Replaced fuse links per regional directive. No improvement. Battery drain continues. TX cycling persists. My hand was still holding the pen above the page. I couldn't move it, couldn't look away. Rowan was saying something behind me, but I didn't catch it. I read the entry again. The handwriting didn't waver or blur. It was just there. Solid ink on paper. I'd written instructions to myself from a day that hadn't happened yet, or I would write them. Tomorrow. After we replaced fuse links that we hadn't touched. The pen dropped from my fingers and hit the desk. "Rice?" I turned. Rowan was staring at me. "Look at this," I said. My voice came out flat. He crossed the small room in 2 steps and leaned over my shoulder. I pointed at the entry. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he picked up the logbook, held it closer to his face, tilted it toward the window slot, checking if the ink was wet, maybe, or if it was some kind of trick. It wasn't. He set the book back down carefully. "That's your writing." "Yeah. You didn't just..." "No. We stood there. The transmitter clicked again behind us. The warning tone sounded from the speaker, that same 3-second climb. I didn't flinch this time. Rowan rubbed his face with both hands. Okay, this is... The satellite phone rang. I picked it up on the second ring. Rice. Stanley, it's Paisley. Her voice sounded tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. She didn't wait for me to respond. Are you still seeing the cycling behavior? Yeah, and the batteries are still draining. I glanced at the logbook, didn't finish the sentence. It's not stabilizing. Duluth is reporting similar activity across multiple sites along the lake, she said. The words came out fast, clipped. Tower Hill, Split Rock, 2 harbors, all of them showing intermittent signal loss and unexplained power draw. I looked at Rowan. He was watching me. How many sites? I asked. 6 so far, regionals aware. They're trying to coordinate with the utility companies, but nobody can trace the load. She paused. I heard papers rustling on her end. I need you to shut it down. That stopped me. Shut down the transmitter. Shut down the entire site, main breaker. Pull it offline until I get direction from regional. I didn't say anything right away. Shutting down a transmitter meant killing the warning system. If there was an actual emergency, storm, flood, whatever, people wouldn't get the alert. That was the whole point of these sites. They had to stay live. Stanley, did you hear me? Yeah, I heard you. This is coming from above me. I don't like it either, but we don't know what we're dealing with. Her voice softened just a fraction. Still controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. Just kill the power and get back on the road. Understood, I said. She hung up without saying anything else. I set the phone down. Rowan was still watching me. She wants it offline, I said. He nodded slowly. Makes sense. If it's happening at other sites too. Yeah. I walked over to the main electrical panel on the wall next to the equipment rack. Gray metal box about 2 feet tall. I opened the cover. Inside was the main breaker, a heavy black switch in the up position, and below it the individual circuit breakers for the transmitter, backup unit, lights, and heater. I put my hand on the main breaker. Hated this part. Hated leaving a site dark. These transmitters were supposed to run continuously. They were the last line for people who needed information when everything else failed. Cutting power felt wrong on a level I couldn't quite articulate. But orders were orders. I pulled the breaker down. The transmitter's green light went dark. The power supply fan spun down with a fading whine. The overhead fluorescent light cut out, leaving just the pale gray daylight from the window slot. The heater clicked off. Silence. I waited. Then the warning tone sounded again, fainter this time, muffled, but still there. That same 3-second climb from low hum to high sharp edge. Rowan turned toward the speaker on the wall. How is it? No power, I said. I was staring at the equipment rack. Everything was dark. No lights, no displays. The speaker shouldn't have been able to make any sound. The tone came again. Not from the speaker this time. Or not just from the speaker. It seemed to come from deeper in the wall itself, like it had moved into the cinder block, into the concrete. A vibration more than a sound. I closed the breaker panel. Rowan was standing very still in the middle of the room. Rice, we should go. He was right. We should go. Get in the truck, drive back to Duluth, file a report, let someone else figure it out. That's what a reasonable person would do. But I wasn't thinking reasonably. I was thinking about the meter outside spinning too fast, about the battery drain with no source, about my handwriting in the logbook from tomorrow, about 6 sites along Lake Superior all showing the same impossible behavior. When I lose control of something, I fix something smaller. That's what I do. That's always what I do. We need to test the backup generator, I said. Rowan blinked. What? If the utility feed is causing the problem, we prove it by running stable power independent of the grid. Generators outside, self-contained, diesel, no connection to the utility line. Paisley told us to shut it down and leave. She told us to shut down the transmitter. We did. I was already moving toward the door. This is just testing the backup system, making sure it's operational before we go. That was a thin justification, and we both knew it. Rowan didn't move. You really think that's going to help? No, I said. But I need to know. He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he sighed and pulled his hood up. Gas cans in the truck. I'll get the pull cord from the storage locker. I grabbed the hut key from my pocket and unlocked the narrow metal cabinet beside the desk. Inside was a coil of extension cord, a toolbox, spare fuses and a plastic case, and the generator pull cord wrapped in a loop. I took the cord and headed for the door. Rowan followed. I stepped outside. The wind hit me first, stronger than before, colder. It came from the east, off the frozen lake, and it carried a pressure I couldn't name. Not just cold, not just wind. Wrong. The trees around the hut stood too still despite the wind. The branches didn't move. The snow on the ground didn't drift. Everything felt compressed somehow, like the air had weight. I stopped on the concrete pad outside the door. Rowan came up beside me. He'd pulled his hood tight and his hands were already in his pockets. He looked at the trees, then at me. You feel that? He asked. Yeah. The forest felt like it was waiting, watching. I'd worked in remote sites for 6 years, spent hours alone in the woods, checking equipment, running lines, clearing brush. I knew what isolation felt like, what silence felt like. This wasn't that. This was something else pressing in from all sides, a presence without a source. The warning tone sounded again from inside the hut behind us, muffled by the walls but still audible, still wrong. I forced myself to move. The backup generator was around the back of the hut, enclosed in a small wooden shed with a slanted roof. I walked along the side of the building, boots crunching on frozen snow, pull cord in my hand. Rowan went the other direction toward the truck to get the gas can. I rounded the corner and stopped. The generator shed door was open. I'd locked it last time I was here. 3 months ago, routine maintenance check. I always locked it. Now it hung half open, the padlock dangling from the hasp. Still closed, still locked. But the screws holding the hasp to the door frame had pulled free from the wood. I stood there looking at it. The wind pushed against my back. The trees didn't move. I heard Rowan's boots crunching through the snow behind me, the slosh of liquid in the gas can. He came up beside me and saw the door. Huh, he said. I didn't respond. I pulled the door open the rest of the way. The generator sat inside on a wooden platform, a yellow Generac unit about the size of a suitcase with a pull-start engine and a diesel tank. I'd serviced it in October, topped off the fuel, checked the oil, ran it for 20 minutes to make sure it turned over clean. It looked fine now. No damage, no animal nests, nothing disturbed. Except the fuel cap was off. The tank was full. I stood there looking at the generator shed door with the padlock still closed, but the hasp pulled free from the wood. The screws were gone, not stripped out, just gone. The holes in the door frame looked clean, like they'd never held anything. I turned back toward the front of the hut, and that's when I saw the sky. There was a green smear across it. East to west, maybe 30 degrees up from the horizon. Not bright, kind of pale, washed out against the gray daylight. It looked exactly like the northern lights I'd seen 100 times up here. That thin ribbon effect, that color, but it wasn't moving. The aurora always moves. It shifts and pulses and folds back on itself. This just hung there, static. I stood watching it for maybe 15 seconds and it didn't change at all. The air felt wrong, too, heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but colder, sharper. I could feel it in my chest when I breathed. The headache behind my right eye got worse, and the forest had gone completely quiet. I don't mean peaceful quiet, I mean dead. No wind sound in the branches. No distant bird calls. No creaking wood or snow sliding off pine boughs. Nothing. The wind was still blowing. I could feel it against my face, pulling at my jacket, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I looked down at the snow in front of the generator shed. My boot prints were clear coming around the corner. Standard tread pattern, spaced normal. But there were other prints too. Bare feet. They came from the direction of the fence line, maybe 20 yards out where the trees got thicker. They walked straight toward the hut. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't wander, didn't circle. Just a direct line across the snow to the front door where they stopped. Someone had stood right outside the door, barefoot, in January, in Minnesota. The prints were narrow, smaller than mine. The toes were defined, clearly visible. No sign of frostbite damage or hesitation in the gait. Just steady steps through snow that should have been killing them. I walked back around to the front of the hut and crouched next to the prints at the door. They faced the metal door dead on, both feet together, parallel, like someone standing at attention or listening. There were no prints leading away. I heard Rowan coming back through the trees from the truck. He had the red plastic gas can in one hand, hood still up. He stopped when he saw me crouched by the door. "What is it?" I pointed at the prints. He looked, didn't say anything for a few seconds. "Those weren't here before," he said. "No. That's impossible." "Yeah." He set the gas can down and walked a slow circle around the prints, careful not to step on them. Then he looked back toward the fence line, following the trail. "Someone walked here barefoot. Looks like it. In this cold." "Yeah. And just stood here." I stood up. My knees popped. "That's what it looks like." Rowan stared at the prints for another few seconds, then picked up the gas can. "Let's test the generator and get the hell out." I didn't argue. We went around to the generator shed. The door was still hanging open with the hasp pulled loose. Inside, the backup generator sat on a concrete pad. A Generac diesel unit, maybe 10 years old. Yellow paint faded and chipped. I'd serviced it 3 months ago. Oil change, fuel filter, air filter. It had run fine. I took the pull cord from my pocket and fed it through the starter assembly while Rowan unscrewed the fuel cap and poured in gas from the can. The tank took maybe 2 gallons before it was full. Rowan replaced the cap and stepped back. I primed the fuel line, flipped the choke, set the throttle to start position. First pull, nothing. The cord yanked back hard and the engine turned over but didn't catch. Second pull, same thing. Just compression and the cord snapping back. Third pull, it caught. The engine coughed, sputtered, ran rough for maybe 3 seconds with black smoke puffing from the exhaust, then smoothed out into a steady mechanical rumble. I adjusted the throttle and let it warm up. The sound was normal. Maybe a little louder than I remembered, but generators are loud. The shed amplified it. Then the hut lights came on. I could see the glow through the window slot from where I stood. Pale fluorescent white spilling out into the gray daylight. I'd left the main breaker off. I'd pulled it down myself 10 minutes ago. The lights shouldn't have power. I looked at Rowan. He was staring at the hut with the empty gas can still in his hand. "You left it off," he said. "Yeah." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." The generator kept running, smooth and steady now. I didn't touch the throttle. I walked fast toward the hut door, pulled it open, and went inside. Every rack indicator was lit. The primary transmitter had a full row of green LEDs across the front panel. The backup unit next to it showed standby mode with amber lights. The power supply had all 3 status lights on: utility input, battery charge, and DC output. The diagnostic screen glowed bright blue with white text scrolling across it. It looked like the station was broadcasting at full power. I stepped closer to the rack and watched the screen. Numbers scrolled past in a continuous loop. I recognized them immediately. Coordinates: 47.9, 274 north, 90.2158 west. That was this site. November Whiskey Romeo 7. Those were the exact coordinates from the site documentation binder in the truck. The numbers scrolled off the screen and new text appeared. Stay asleep. It held for 3 seconds, then repeated. Stay asleep. Then the coordinates again. Then the message. Over and over. I stood there watching it cycle 3 times. My mouth was dry. The headache had spread from behind my right eye to my whole forehead. Rowan came in behind me. He saw the screen. What the hell is that? I don't know. Is it transmitting that? I checked the VU meter on the front panel. The needle sat at 0. No audio input, no modulation. The transmitter was lit up like it was running, but the meter showed nothing going out. I don't think so, I said. Then what's it for? I didn't answer. I reached for the primary transmitter's power switch, a red toggle on the lower right corner of the front panel. I flipped it down to the off position. Nothing happened. The light stayed on. The screen kept scrolling. I flipped it again. Still nothing. I tried the backup unit. Same thing. The switch moved, but the lights didn't respond. There was an emergency stop button on the power supply, a big red mushroom button under a clear plastic cover. I'd never used it. It was supposed to kill everything instantly, disconnect the batteries, shut down all DC output. I flipped the cover up and pressed the button. It clicked, went down maybe half an inch, then popped back out. I pressed it again. Same thing. Click, pop, like it wasn't connected to anything anymore. The screen kept scrolling. Stay asleep. Rice. Rowan's voice was tight. He was standing by the door, looking out through the gap. We need to leave. Right now. I turned away from the rack. Yeah. I grabbed the satellite phone from the desk and shoved it in my jacket pocket. The logbook was still open to the entry in my handwriting dated tomorrow. I left it. I followed Rowan out the door and pulled it shut behind me. Didn't bother locking it. The generator was still running around back, that steady mechanical rumble cutting through the dead quiet of the forest. Rowan started walking toward the trail that led back to the fence and the access road. I followed. We got maybe 10 steps before Rowan stopped. I almost ran into him. Rice. He wasn't moving, just staring straight ahead down the trail. I stepped beside him and looked. The gate was gone. The chain-link fence was still there on both sides, running east and west through the trees. But the section with the gate, the part we'd opened with the key from the lockbox maybe an hour ago, was just gone. No posts, no frame, no gate. The chain that had been looped through the fence was cut. Clean cut, straight through one of the links. The 2 ends hung down against the mesh, not rusted or worn, just severed. And past where the gate should have been, there was no road. The access road we'd driven in on, the 200-yard dirt track from the Gunflint Trail to the fence, was gone. In its place was untouched snow and trees, thick pine and birch tight together, branches heavy with snow, old growth. The kind of forest that takes decades to fill in. It hadn't been there this morning. I stood there looking at the trees where the road should have been, at the cut chain, at the fence that just stopped on both sides with no gate. Rowan turned in a slow circle, looking at the hut, the trees, the sky with its green smear still hanging motionless. Rice, he said quietly. Where's the road? I didn't answer. I didn't have one. We walked anyway. The truck wasn't there and the road was gone, but I figured we could follow where it should be. Rowan stayed close on my left. I could hear his breathing and the crunch of his boots in the snow. That was about it. The warning tone kept going behind us. Fainter now. 3 seconds climbing from low to high, then silence, then again. But underneath it, something else started. A hum. Low and steady and not coming from the hut. It rose from the ground itself. I could feel it in my boots, in my knees, in my chest. Not quite a sound, more like pressure. I kept my eyes on the trees ahead. The fence line should have been maybe 20 yards out. Then the gate. Then the access road running back to the main trail. Simple route. I'd walked it an hour ago. The hum got louder. I looked back. The hut sat behind us, close, too close. We'd been walking for probably 2 minutes at a decent pace and should have covered 50 yards easy. But the cinderblock walls looked maybe 30 feet away. The antenna mast rose straight and narrow against the green smear in the sky. I could see the generator shed around the back with its door still hanging open. Rice! Rowan's voice came out flat. I turned forward again. He'd stopped walking. His arm came up and he pointed ahead through the trees. I saw the hut. Same cinderblock walls, same steel roof, same antenna mast. But the angle was wrong. I was looking at it from the side, not the front. The window slot faced east instead of south. The generator shed sat on the left instead of the right. I stood there. Rowan stood beside me. Neither of us said anything. 2 huts, same site, same structure, different positions. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up cold and bright in my hand. The time read 11:43. I checked my watch. The hands showed 11:26. I stared at both for probably 10 seconds. Then I shook my watch and held it to my ear. Still ticking, steady rhythm, nothing wrong with the movement. Check your phone, I said. Rowan pulled his out. He tapped the screen a couple times. Frozen. What's it say? 1200. Exactly noon. He tapped it again. No, wait. Seconds are moving. Just the hour and minute stuck. I tried my phone again. 11:44 now. My watch still said 11:26. The second hand swept smooth and continuous around the face. The hum from the ground got deeper. I felt it in my teeth. I pulled out the satellite phone. Heavy black brick with a thick antenna. I extended it and hit power. The screen took maybe 15 seconds to acquire signal. 3 bars. Good enough. I scrolled to Paisley's direct line and pressed call. It rang 4 times. She picked up on the 5th. O'Brien. It's Rice. November, Whiskey Romeo 7. Rice. Her voice sounded strained. Same tone from the earlier call. Tight and controlled, but with something underneath. You're still on site? Yeah, I stopped. Tried to figure out how to explain. We've got a situation. Define situation. The road's gone, truck's gone, we can't get back to the gate. Silence on the line. Just faint static and the hum of the satellite connection. Paisley. Rice, what are you talking about? Her voice came back sharper. You never arrived. I felt something cold drop through my chest. What? Your GPS tracker shows the truck parked in Grand Marais, near the Holiday Station on Highway 61. You've been there for the past 2 hours. That's not possible. We've been at the site since 9:43. I texted you when we arrived. I didn't receive any text from you this morning. I pulled the phone away from my ear and checked the message thread. My text from 9:43 sat right there in blue. Arrived on site. Starting inspection. Below it, her reply. Understood. Report findings by 1100. I put the phone back to my ear. I'm looking at the thread right now. You responded at 9:44. Rice, I'm looking at my phone. The last message I have from you is from yesterday, confirming the work order. The hum got louder. Rowan turned in a slow circle, looking at both huts. His hood was still up and his hands were in his pockets. We're at the site, I said. November Whiskey Romeo 7. We've been here all morning. The system shows you never checked in. The gate log shows no access today. I looked back at the first hut, then forward at the second. Same structure, same everything. 2 places at once. Paisley. Get back on the road. Return to Duluth. We'll debrief when you arrive. The road's not here. Her voice went very quiet. What do you mean it's not there? I mean we walked to where it should be and there's just trees. No fence, no gate, no road. The line went silent again. Longer this time. I counted maybe 8 seconds. Rice, listen to me carefully. Find the access road. Get in the truck. Drive back to the main trail. Do not stop. Do not investigate anything else. Just get back on the highway. I'm telling you, the road isn't... She hung up. I stood there with the satellite phone against my ear. The hum vibrated through my boots into my legs. I lowered the phone and looked at Rowan. She says we're not here, I said. Where does she think we are? Grand Marais. Near the Holiday. Rowan pulled his hood back. His face looked pale. That's 40 minutes south. I nodded. He looked at the hut ahead, then back at the one behind. So what do we do? I didn't have an answer. The road was gone. The truck was gone. Paisley said we weren't here. But the huts were real. The snow was real. The cold was real. I turned toward the nearest hut. The one ahead with the wrong angle. We go back inside, I said. Rowan didn't argue. We walked toward it, 30 feet, then 20. The distance felt right this time. Normal. The door came into view. Same heavy steel with the narrow window slot above. I reached for the handle. It turned. I stopped. I'd locked it. I always locked it. Standard procedure. You don't leave a transmitter site unsecured. I pulled the door open anyway. The heat hit me first, not the cool 40 degrees from the automatic heater, actual warmth, maybe 70, maybe more. The air felt thick and wet. The smell came next, wet wool, strong and musty and wrong for a transmitter hut that only ever smelled like concrete and cold electronics. I stepped inside. The layout matched. Equipment rack on the left, desk on the right, concrete floor, window slot. But the lights were on, all the panel indicators glowing, the screen still scrolling coordinates, and the message. Stay asleep. Over and over. And on the floor by the desk, half buried in a puddle of melted snow, sat a pair of boots. Not mine. Not Rowan's. Brown leather work boots, size maybe 9 or 10, laces tied. Snow packed in the treads melting into the concrete. Beside them, a handheld microphone, the kind that connects to the transmitter for manual broadcast. It sat on the floor with the cord stretched tight to the rack and the push-to-talk button wrapped in layers of duct tape. Held down, keyed continuous. I crossed to it and crouched down. The tape was fresh, clean edges, no dust. I pulled my glove off and picked at the corner with my fingernail. Got it loose, peeled it back in one long strip. The button popped up. The tone kept going. I stood there holding the tape in my hand. The tone climbed from low to high. 3 seconds. Silence. Again. Rowan stepped up beside me. Rice! I looked at him. He pointed at the window slot. I turned. Outside, past the fence line where the trees got thick, something moved. Big. Heavy. Pushing through the branches with a sound like breaking wood. It didn't stop. Rowan moved first. He stepped past me and flipped the overhead light switch down. The fluorescent tube died and the room went dim. Just the rack indicators glowing green and amber, and that faint gray daylight from the window slot. I crouched beside the rack and shifted closer to the window. The slot was maybe 6 inches tall and 2 feet wide, positioned high on the wall near the ceiling. I had to angle my head to see out. The trees beyond the fence line were moving, not swaying, moving aside. Something big pushed through them. Branches snapped with sounds like rifle cracks. I heard the scrape of bark and the low creak of wood bending under weight. Then it stepped into view. A moose. That's what my brain said first. The size was right. The bulk. The dark mass of it against the snow and trees. But the legs bent wrong. They folded backward at the knee, or where the knee should have been. The joints angled forward like a dog's hind legs, but the proportions were all off. Too long in the lower section, too thin at the top. It moved smooth. No hesitation. No limp. The head came next. It lowered toward the window, and I stopped breathing. The face pressed against the glass. Flat. Too flat. The muzzle was there but compressed, like someone had taken a moose skull and pushed it into wet clay until the features blurred. No eyes. The sockets were there. I could see the shape of them. But the skin was smooth, unbroken. No lids, no lash line. Just skin stretched tight over the hollows where eyes should have been. It worked its nostrils, flaring, pulling air in long, deliberate draws. I thought about dogs sniffing for food, for blood. This wasn't that. It was smelling for current, for the hum in the wires, for whatever frequency the transmitter had been pushing into the ground. I knew that. Don't ask me how. Rowan's voice came quiet from behind me. Flare kit's in the truck. I didn't move, didn't look away from the window. The thing's head tilted, slow, like it heard him. We run for it, I said, kept my voice flat, steady. Get in the truck, drive until something looks familiar. Call for help from somewhere stable. Okay. I stood, my knees cracked. The headache behind my right eye pulsed hard enough to make my vision blur for a second. Rowan moved to the door. His hand went to the handle. I grabbed the satellite phone off the desk and shoved it back in my jacket pocket. Left the logbook. Left everything else. Go. Rowan yanked the door open and we burst out. The cold hit first, then the wind, then the ground. My boots sank, not into snow, into something else. It grabbed at the sole, pulled, like stepping into wet cement that hadn't set yet. I tried to lift my foot and it came up slow, heavy, the surface clung. I looked down. The snow was gone. What I'd thought was snow, what had been snow 10 minutes ago when we walked to the generator shed, was ash now. Packed, dense, gray-white and smooth, and warm. I could feel it through the boot leather. Not hot, just warm. Like it had been sitting in the sun for hours. Rowan stumbled beside me. His arms went out for balance and he caught himself on one knee. What the hell? The moose thing slid around the corner of the hut. Slid. That's the only word. Its legs moved, but the motion was wrong, too fast, too smooth, like it was on rails. I yanked the flare gun from my jacket pocket. Standard issue, orange plastic grip, single shot. Rowan tried to stand and his boots stuck. He pulled hard and the ash made a wet sucking sound. The thing was 15 feet away. 10. I raised the gun, aimed center mass, pulled the trigger. The flare hit its chest and burst. Red phosphorus light flooded everything, bright enough to hurt. The thing stopped. I saw its skin, pale, mottled, stretched tight over the frame, and under the skin, shapes, hands, pressing outward. Dozens of them. Small hands. Human hands. Pushing against the membrane from the inside like they were trying to get out. The flare burned into its chest, and the hands pushed harder. The skin bulged, rippled. Then it turned, away from the light, toward Rowan. No! I dropped the flare gun and grabbed Rowan's arm with both hands. Pulled, hard. He came free. His boot didn't. It stayed in the ash, laces still tied, stuck vertical like a marker. Rowan hit the ground on his side and I dragged him up. His socked foot landed in the ash and he hissed through his teeth but kept moving. We ran. The truck was ahead, 20 yards. 15. I could see it through the trees. White Silverado with the contractor decal on the door, parked right where we'd left it. The gate was open. I didn't remember opening it on the way out. Rowan reached the driver's side door first and yanked it open. I went around the front and pulled the passenger side. Locked. Rice. I slapped the window. Unlock it. Rowan leaned across the seat and hit the button. The lock popped. I got in and slammed the door. Rowan already had his hand on the ignition. Empty. No keys. Where are they? His voice cracked. I had them. I checked my pockets, jacket, pants. Nothing. I had them when we got here. Rowan looked at me, then past me. Out the passenger window. I followed his gaze. There, in the ash, 10 feet from the truck, a key ring, silver carabiner, 3 keys, faded blue plastic tag with the site code written in Sharpie. Mine. Sitting in the ash like it had been there for months, years. I shoved the door open and stumbled out. My boots sank again, but I kept moving, grabbed the ring. The metal was ice cold. Back in the truck. Door shut. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine caught. Turned over once. Died. Come on! I turned it again. Click, click, click. Dead battery. That's impossible, Rowan said. We just drove it here. I looked at the dash. The radio display was dark. The clock was dark. Everything was dark. Drained. Behind us, the hut door swung open. No wind, no hand, just open. The warning tone surged, louder than before. Not from the speaker. From everywhere. The ground, the trees, the air itself. I understood then. The hut wasn't the source. It was the mouth. And the thing outside, the moose thing, the ash, the tone, it was hurting us. Back toward the signal. Stay low, I said. Rowan looked at me. What are you doing? I grabbed the handheld radio from the center console. Cheap Motorola. Battery indicator showed full. Stay here. Lock the doors. Rice. I was already out. The mast was 50 feet behind the hut. Standard 3-section tower. 60 feet tall. Guy wires anchored to concrete footings. I ran. The ash pulled at my boots, but I kept moving. Fast as I could. The base of the mast had a lightning arrestor box, gray metal, padlocked. I yanked the lock. It held. Kicked it. The hasp bent. The screws pulled free. Inside, wiring. Thick copper ground cables running from the mast down into conduit, insulation, junction blocks. I pulled the second flare from my jacket, twisted the cap, struck it against the rough strip. It ignited. Red flame. Hot enough to feel on my face. I jammed it into the wiring. The insulation bubbled, turned black. The copper underneath started to glow. The hum in the ground spiked. I felt it in my teeth. My skull. Behind me. Movement. I didn't turn. Held the flare there, pushed it deeper. The moose thing rushed me. I heard it. Felt the displacement of air. The mast groaned. Metal stress. High-pitched, sharp. One of the guy wires snapped, whipped past my head and buried itself in the ash. The tower tilted. Slow, then fast. It crashed into the trees. 60 feet of steel and aluminum hitting frozen pine with a sound like thunder. The cables ripped, tore free from the hut. Sparks showered from the junction box on the back wall. The warning tone cut off. Mid-note. Just gone. The air went empty. Hollow. I stood there, flare still burning in my hand. The ash under my boots cooled, hardened, went from warm and sticky to cold and brittle in the span of 3 seconds. I dropped the flare and stepped back. The moose thing was gone. The hut door hung open. Dark inside. No lights, no indicators. I turned and walked back to the truck. Rowan was in the passenger seat now, hunched, staring down at his socked foot. I got in the driver's side, put the key in the ignition, turned it. The engine started. First try. I looked past the hood. The access road was there, beyond the gate. Plowed, open, tire tracks in the snow, like it had been the whole time. I put the truck in drive and hit the gas. We rolled forward, through the gate, onto the road. I didn't look back. Rowan sat silent beside me. His breath fogged the window. He kept staring at his foot. I drove hard. 40, 50. Faster than I should have on a gravel access road in January. The trees blurred past. 10 minutes later, we hit the bend where the road curved south toward the main trail. My phone buzzed. Signal, 2 bars. I pulled the satellite phone from my pocket, handed it to Rowan. Call Paisley. He took it, extended the antenna, dialed. It rang 4 times. O'Brien. I took the phone. It's Rice. Rice, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. The mast failed. Sights collapsed. Unsafe conditions. We're heading back. Silence. Then, what do you mean the mast failed? It came down. Lightning arresters shorted. Whole structures compromised. We had to evacuate. You took down a federal transmitter? It came down on its own. We were securing the site when it happened. More silence. I'm opening an incident response. You'll need to file a full report when you get back. This is going to cost your contract, Rice. You know that. Yeah. Get to the office. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. Straight here. She hung up. I set the phone on the dash. Rowan shifted beside me. His hand went to his ankle, rubbed it through the sock. You okay? I asked. Boot's gone. I know. It was tied. Laces were tied. I know. He looked at me. What was that thing? I didn't answer. Kept driving. The main trail appeared ahead. Paved, plowed, normal. I turned south. Grand Marais was 40 minutes away. I checked the rearview mirror. The trees hid the sight now. The hut, the mast, all of it gone behind the curve of the road. But the sky, the green smear was still there, horizontal, steady, like a fixed light that refused to go out. I kept my eyes on the road and drove,